Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, today in our three readings we meet 8 very great figures in the history of salvation. In the first reading we meet Abraham and Sarah. They were an elderly couple, very comfortable in their old age, living with their family and friends, and God comes and says, I'll make you the father to Abraham of a great nation. Just pick up your belongings and move on and go where I tell you. Well, they had faith enough to listen to the word of God, and they picked up and moved on. If we think of it even today, people in their 70s would not be too willing to pick up and move to parts unknown simply because God told them to. But their faith was strong. In the second reading, we meet first of all Paul, who wrote it, and we know he received a call from God and answered, and his life was changed. Peter, James, and John, they met Jesus, and Jesus said, follow me, and they left everything behind, and with their faith, they followed. On the Transfiguration, Jesus took Peter, James, and John. He went up the mountain, and when he was transfigured, with him were Moses and Elijah, 2 other great figures who were called and left behind what they had to do the bidding of the Word of God. All of them had this call from God, a vocation. And it's interesting to remember that we too have been called by God, and we received a certain faith with our baptisms. We have a call to follow. But if you think about the 8 figures from the history of salvation, they all went about fastidiously doing what God wanted. Abraham and Sarah moving on, but they never saw the completion. They never saw the great nation that God promised them. Yet Abraham and Sarah, if you think about it, they stand tall in the history of Christianity, in the history of Judaism, and in the history of the Muslims. They are the father of really 3 great nations, the father and mother. Paul, look at him, how he endlessly traveled through his life, all throughout, spreading the gospel, starting churches. All Peter, James, and John, they did the same. Moses, he went to Egypt, he drew the people out, he took them through the desert, he stayed with them in the desert, yet he never entered the promised land. Elijah was called to preach the word of God. But one thing about all of them, the mission they got, they never really saw a total completion of that mission. When Christ said, go out and baptize, they never saw the whole world baptized. In fact, today, there is much work to be done in the call to go out and to baptize. That mission is still part of our vocation that we received when we were baptized. We were baptized into a royal priesthood. That means a determination that we are called to go out, preach the word of God by how we live, by what we say, by what we do. How much do we think of that in our day-to-day lives, that we're ready to do as Christ told us and preach the word of God? How aware are we that the last person that you saw today or yesterday might have been maybe the most important person you ever met, because that person was looking for the love, for the faith that Jesus was ready to give them through us, through our actions, through our love, through what we do. So today when we see the story of the Transfiguration, where Christ was giving a certain strength to increase the faith and help his disciples through the time when he would suffer his death and resurrection, remember our vocation is the same as theirs. And that of all the figures in the history of salvation, only one completed the full mission of their vocation and their calling, and that was Jesus himself. And he only did it through his death and the resurrection, coming back. And our vocation will be completed when Christ returns on the last day.